Welcome to the Consultant's Way podcast. I'm Dean McMann, one of your hosts.
And I'm Anthony Paluska. In each episode, we explore the world of consulting professional services through case studies, our own experiences, and interviews with industry leaders.
We're focused on improving individual skills and improving business practices and improving the success of the consulting business.
I think you'll enjoy what we have in store today.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us. Today, we're going to have the great opportunity to talk to Jason Mele. Jason has got a wealth of experience working in organizations, and matter of fact, his topics about this is how to use those natural complementary or even conflicting goals and objectives and backgrounds and everything, and use that. And I believe he uses this constructive tension and almost not irritation. And he's got a lot of wealth of experience about that. And he's going to share with us today a lot about, how do you make the organization successful in these complex products and services businesses where there's conflicts of background and even, financial objectives. Jason, if you don't mind, take a minute and tell us all about you from your own point of view.
Yeah, so I came most recently out of 12 years in the event tech and marketing tech space. More specifically, I built up and was leading our professional services practice. Some of those adjectives I'm sure have been used to describe me before. Absolutely, yeah, and I think that whether or not you're knitting teams together or there is friction, it's really important to try to see how you can leverage that to really get the best result, right? So it's if you are pitching like a unified vision between your product team, your operations team, your commercial group for sure. If everyone's aligned, great, you're in shape. But if there's tension between those teams on the direction they want to go, there is sometimes in a corporate environment a tendency to try to just come to a decision instead of exploring the reasons for that. Doing the most complex work has its challenges, but trying to help your sales team understand the value proposition to the customer, if they're not on board and they don't understand the vision, then you've just made everyone's lives a lot harder. So I'd rather say, hey, let's dig in to those deltas and figure out if we can use that push and pull to get us all to the best midpoint between those solutions.
Yeah, and do you mind take that a little further? Give us without disclosing something that's private to one of the companies you work, but give us an example of using. Most of the time we hear, I need to get alignment all over the top, and once you have alignment, and you know what, we all know that people who work on a comp plan see the world differently, right? People who develop products it's just different specialties and disciplines. So if you wouldn't mind, give us an example of living through that without, again, disclosing something that might be private.
Oh, absolutely. So if you're running a professional services group, routinely you're the mediator between teams, but ultimately you're responsible for that last 10% of that project is really bringing it over the top, at least in terms in the tech space, right? It is.
Yeah.
It's integrations, it's refining the UI or the UX experience. It's maybe a little bit of adjustment of a feature, removing things altogether. Often I'm finding that I'm prioritizing projects that are ultimately digging into the same engineering time that the product team really wants to prioritize on the roadmap. And they're not wrong, right? And their priorities are completely valid. I'm just trying to find a balance between, hey, we have, for example, I've got a major customer project. This is going to set us up for 3 years of success down the road and potential growth in this account. And what I need to do is I worked really closely with our head of product and dev to try to work out, hey, we've got X amount of spots in the next sprint. Let's look at priorities and let's look at things like, how can I be an engine of your success? No, I need to borrow some of your resources off of the next sprint. But how could I take that potentially as a win and be like, can I use this as a proof of concept, and I can do some research to figure out, hey, maybe I can take this, show this in other customer meetings and help you assess like what the total addressable market for this as a feature might be down the road, as opposed to a custom one-off. That was a good example of just like me saying that, like, I know I am asking for you to inconvenience what your priorities are, but I need to make this a win because we are a team, right? Even if we're under different orgs.
Right. And I think one thing you just showed was that PSO's trying to solve that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The great mediators, right? I mean, there's a lot of functional parts of the job, but there's a lot of undefinables, right? And how do you sort of cast a vision? Because that word professional is in there because it is really the, when the customer sees what you're bringing to market here, everybody's aligned, and there's a clear like map for exactly what the product's going to be, what it's going to do, how it's going to benefit them.
Yeah. So in that instance, you kind of described the example of how, right, we need resources that are otherwise capacity constrained to support other strategic objectives to deliver on a client promise that we've made. I think, right, there's also that tension, and maybe you've got some examples and speak to this, because I think you had just alluded to it a bit, is in the product and professional services push and pull space, there's the, right, that last 10%, how much of that can we pre-package, pre-build as repeatable offers from a professional services implementation perspective? How much of that gets pre-built and repeatable and embedded into a product roadmap over time as part of an overall product strategy, which hurts our professional services revenues in some way, but may help our clients, right? There's some back and forth there. And then there's certain things that'll always be custom and unique that the professional services team will have to make work with whatever iteration of the product exists there. So right there's almost tension on both sides from a product roadmap perspective, as well as tapping into the resources. And I think you were alluding to some of that. Do you have some examples of
It
how
absolutely
that works?
was, yeah.
Yeah.
No, and so that is absolutely true, right? It is. I am looking to be the sort of testing ground for what works and go to market, and then I get to do a little bit of preemptive debugging, right? What did we not use? What did we end up using? A lot of what we do is about plugging up what the sort of like dashboards and data look like. Well, so what did you actually use, and do that vet work for product. I've always said, like what you described, you said, yeah, that's cutting into professional services revenues, but I was fortunate enough to work under the chief operating officer, who incentivized me to say, hey, you're looking to trailblaze and find like the emerging market areas that make sense for this product line we have. Anything that you're taking and gets productized down the road is a success, even if it's cutting into your revenues. And what I would say to the team is, if like, I never want to see anyone worrying about like, oh, we're going to productize this and this is going to cut into our bottom line. It's because like, I am not at a risk of running out of projects for us to trailblaze. So like, I would love for someone to take it off our plate and bring that to market in a more like standardized manner. Same thing goes for operations, right? So while I was running PS, I was also overseeing our technical account managers, who are overseeing enterprise, large strategic clients, your sort of 7-figure, like major corporations. A lot of times they'd come in, they'd have unique needs. And anytime they're like, well, we're starting to see a lot of this trend. I'm like, I talk to my peers in operations and be like, great. I think it's a good opportunity if you want to standardize this and take it off my plate. There's a lot of other new stuff I can do. And it's really about constantly looking forward towards that next opportunity and not being afraid to let the business grow and develop and mature around you.
Yeah. I think that's well stated. What did y'all have freedom, or do you think it's important to have freedom to expand your projects in an account and do more, to not just enable what they view the product opportunity is, but what the real, outcome opportunities are?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's essential. I was very fortunate to have a chief operating officer who gave me a lot of latitude. We set goals based on outcomes and results, and we tied in really close with customer success and sales to kind of target like those sort of larger outcomes. What that let me do is that let me give the team quite a bit of wiggle room to innovate and create like new solutions to problems that like didn't necessarily fit a formula. We did a lot of brainstorming, and I think that, I guess, like you coming from the consulting side, there's a balance between we need a structure and a system, but you also don't want to get so hampered by that structure and system that you're not allowing yourself to find the right solution for the customer. We're talking, a 7-figure contract over a 2-year period. Great. That gives us a lot of leeway to say, like, can we set like first 30-day, 90-day outcomes, first year, second year, right? And it really let us set our own goals for that based on the account strategy. And those like larger accounts let us trailblaze in that way. Does that make sense? Like in terms
Yeah.
of like,
Yeah.
yeah, just sort of giving you
No, that
the
was
freedom
good. That
to
was very
set the
helpful.
right goals for your customer as
Yeah.
opposed to the easily measurable
Two
ones.
things that I'd like to know how you addressed. One is we end up not that you did, but we see I'm running my PS in a product company and I have a bunch of experts that are almost all like individual SMEs or subject matter experts. They don't want to coach somebody to be an expert like them. They're paid a lot. It's tough to have dynamism that you were just talking about in an account when, I am I'm the door washing expert and that's what I do. And, I'm highly valuable and the clients keep asking for me, but, and then the second, which is allied to that, which is we also see so much rote done to get things done because maybe we haven't invested enough in them understanding PS and in product companies that we don't feel, in this case, the leadership, that they're adroit enough to handle different things that come up, right? So those bubble up to leadership instead of my maybe living where they should. So two questions: the causation of only having experts, right, or viewing I practice only through experts, and then overroading to make sure our implementations go well. Productizing sometimes keeps our people from knowing, how to react, and then you end up doing their job.
I don't, that's such a good question because I never felt the point where I had everybody as a SME on any particular thing. What I had was like really specific institutional knowledge, and it was on me as a leader to create an environment. So I've got somebody that's really sharp on like APIs and integrations. They're extremely good with the development. I've got a data and analytics expert, Power BI and Tableau and all that, and dozen different like methodologies, right? And so what I would do is I fostered an environment where people run massive multifaceted projects, but you're the project lead, you're the project manager for this. That just means you're the primary. And so we had a lot of brainstorming time where we would do, instead of a team meeting where I talk about business for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, we would do exclusively project workshopping. So I've got my integrations API expert, and I've got somebody who's better with data. They're bouncing ideas off each other off those projects. What I saw was a really well used 40 minutes, right? Because we found solutions to problems. But over the period of like that 3.5 years, I saw the skill level on those areas go up with everybody. So it was like tide raising all boats.
That's very good.
And so I had like a guy who's like, "Oh yeah, I just mocked up a JSON payload for this customer." I'm like, "When did you learn to do that?" It's like, "Oh, we were brainstorming it last week, and in going through the process, I kind of picked it up." And I'm like, "Okay, so you just in the process of going through it with your peers, your skill set elevated." And so we took skills from everywhere, and that elevated everyone's to like really solid generalists with SMEs on the team.
Let's you touched on this, and so I'm interested to get your perspective on this as well, which is friction in other areas of the business between professional services and, as Dean alluded to earlier, the the selling or the go to market teams as well, right? Especially once you get into topics like account expansion and upselling and that sort of thing, where the professional services organization often builds a deep level of customer intimacy, but also has a lot more of the customer specific knowledge of what they actually need and where that comes. Some organizations see that friction point where sales needs to be involved in those conversations and doesn't want professional services involved. In other cases, professional services drives a lot of that. But the best organizations have that healthy tension that you've alluded to, where right sales is looking for opportunities. There's a team selling approach and some collaboration on what are the opportunities to expand and to grow this account, and then what roles do we all need to play. But I don't know if you have any lessons learned from those
Or
functions.
tragic stories. Either way, it's fine.
I was just talking to a company about this the other day, and they're looking to commercialize their professional services team, right? Going from like a cost center to, hey, we want to monetize this. Having gone through that motion, that is your biggest obstacle. And in getting there, you have to earn the trust with sales, right? Where it goes from like they're discussing the need with you, and you're kind of getting that game of telephone from the customer or their IT group to the customer to the sales rep to you. Obviously, you want to stay focused and you want to strategize with your account executive CSM. I think that you want to have a dialogue with your commercial leadership on partnering on these solutions. I am there to be a set of ears to help you solution outcomes for the customer. And that comes from how you sort of assemble the scoping process to make sure that you're aligned with your AE. It comes culturally, right? It's just establishing, it's like, listen, I know sales is an extremely different job than like a technical job. However, let's appreciate that is also a hard job, and it also has its nuances that maybe like you or I don't understand to the depth of like that team. So let's appreciate each other's skill sets. Let's collaborate internally ahead of the call. Let's say like, hey, you probably have some insights, pre-discovery calls, your like BD info, and say, hey, can we have a couple of things we can like plan out as things that you can sort of like tap us in on to make you look really good. And there's no shortcut, there's no trick, there's no like magic playbook. It's built trust with the individuals, and they have to see that you're invested in their success as a sales team.
Yeah.
We have a client, a couple of clients right now that are big tech that are doing something different, which I think is interesting. All their account execs are consultants. They have new account sales, but every account exec, it came out of their consulting group because they thought they're better with content, they're better with executives, they have a closer relationship with making the changes, and they're more willing to fill out forms, they're more willing to do account journeys, and so it's a really cool experiment. And they're both very big. I mean, these are
Yeah.
multi-billion-dollar organizations. And the first one I ever saw do that, IBM did that early on during Gerstner's time, and they made not all account exec, but they made a bunch of them partners out of the big six because they had executive presence and stuff. So I think that's an interesting journey because the way you talk about it and the way we live often is we're the stepchild. So somebody's got to make this work. It's us. You're not going to meet us halfway, right? You're not going to meet us halfway. We own all of it, and I think good owning it. But over time, it would be good to have a seat at the a normal seat at the table, and that's hard. It's just difficult.
It's extremely hard. Only in like the last year have I sort of, maybe year and a half, have I branched out into doing the sort of pre-sales as well as the delivery part, right? In terms of like not just like existing customers, but like, hey, we're new logo.
Yeah, you got involved in the new deals. Yeah,
and there's still sales engineers who do that more demo side solution, but this is in terms of like, hey, you're looking, you got a big technical institution, they have very specific needs. We're happy to join and be in the room. In this way, we can collaborate with you after just like initial sort of those like sometimes like enterprise contracts are taking 6, 8, 12 months, sometimes more. So in that time, a little bit of time invested up front in the pre-sales process allows us to help them navigate that process to understand things like, great, we're talking about this contract, but like, let's look at the operating costs to not just to build this, but also to administer it over a period of 3 years. And so I can do things like both bring you solutions, but I can also give you metrics where you can like talk to that customer and be like, hey, we're going to need to invest a significant amount of engineering time to build this solution for you. But if we look at this, if you're going to stay with us for 3.5 years, 4 years, now you're going to see a lot more return on that initial engineering investment. And you start sort of being able to make this a more palatable proposal.
Yeah,
to
they
their
can
CEO.
amortize that over the life of value. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen it, but where we always see that fails or breaks down is in those large deal cycles. Professional services needs to be engaged early in that process, or at least at a certain stage before that deal closes, to help shape and scope appropriately and make sure, even if you have the best kind of pre-sales or solution expert, architect resources embedded in that, PS ultimately owns the delivery of it, and we don't want something tossed over the fence for us to actually have to deliver on, because that ends up with bad outcomes all across the board. But where it breaks down is when that starts to be a professional services needs to be engaged at this stage of the process because it benefits us professional services in this process. That creates pushback and friction versus what you just described is, look, come in there, add value. We've been in the trenches. We've seen implementations exist at organizations like yours. We'll tell you the 7 reasons why you're going to have a challenge that you don't even expect yet. And we're automatically adding value and helping speed up the sales process rather than the perception that PS being involved will just slow it down. And so that's I think that
was a
point you
great
made. Yeah.
attitude. Yeah.
nail on the head.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I phrased it a little more simply when I was kind of moving into that phase, being like, in terms of trust with the customer, it's like the person that you're talking to that's helping you in the pre-sale, they're responsible for delivering it. And I would say this, like, when I met with the customers on sort of like the sort of sales meeting, but so the person that's sort of like scoping this with you, he or she is responsible for delivering it. So that if they're promising something, right, if you're the one delivering it at the end and you're going to spend 3 years administering that, or you're building something that your peers will then have to administer, then the level of trust is going to get built there.
Yeah. They'll be more conservative than you as the buyer on something like that.
But I do like the idea, because we stress, and then I have a follow-up question, but we stress bring the client along with you. And part of that is in the beginning, tell the client what can go wrong, right? And so that they are buying into, they have a responsibility. The steering committee has a responsibility getting the things out of your way. If it's bigger than we expected, it's usually because their data, their people didn't, and we can do that. But that also, the question is, do you find sometimes you're given a project and now you have to resell it, restructure it, redo, because there just wasn't analysis along the way?
That's the lifestyle, right? Absolutely. There's tons of that. It's challenging because you don't want to be phrasing it as this was done incorrectly for you. But how I found it's been a successful to reposition it is, as we've started onboarding you, right? As we're I refer to as stay in a constant state of discovery with your customer.
Yeah.
Right. You're never done discovery. Now there are difference between like, hey, we scoped this wrong versus this is additional scope, new project, right? That's not, we can turn that into an opportunity. But if you found the work wasn't structured correctly in that scoping process, I think it's very effective to, again, bring solutions as a win. I've had success in repurposing and reallocating through a change order a contract and say, hey, you're not using this over here, you need this over here. What I want to do, because you're our customer and we're responsible for outcomes, I'd like to reallocate this towards what I think I'm hearing is that we both agree that actually is what you want. As we've done more discovery, we've kind of learned more about you. and you have a dialogue about like, I think that you can gain more value, and you try to turn that into. In one case, we had a service heavy package that we ended up moving into a kind of software as a service package, which they wanted a few changes to the UI, and they ultimately wanted to deliver it themselves with a sort of technical layer to do like adaptations that ended up being like what ended up being our pro services team. There was some internal strife over that because I am taking a certain dollar figure full service customer and moving them to a self-serve customer that was going to look like a significantly lower renewal the next year. If you just looked at what they were using now, take out the service layer. What I discovered in just actively listening to the customer is that they had growth goals. They were looking to expand to all their other business units, and they weren't going to have the budget to expand to get there by paying high dollar external project managers. So I aligned with like that main program head and said, what is your goal for your program 2 years from now? And he's like, well, I'd like to own all of this within my company globally. So what do you envision makes sense from a business model? And he says like, well, I need to build up an internal team, and I need your team to do that sort of technical adaptation to allow us to keep shifting with those like user needs as they shift. Okay. What if we just chose to do that and we can do a change order? And he's like, well, that'd be great. Can we do that? And I'm like, well, if that's what you need, that's what we should do. Come the next year, we're coming up on a renewal. What we discover is he now owns all of that internally. And so he's looking at a much larger budget that he can do. And he's doing 6 times what we did before because he's been able to scale up. So he's been very successful. And now I'm that partner who is not just selling him a product, but I am trying to find ways that our product can help him achieve his goals.
Yeah, that gets to how do you drive executive value too. So, a couple of takeaways we have, and then I want you to give us your summary of what you think the key things we should know, and then we're going to leave at the end with some things people can do right away. But you've made it very clear that these complexities that are friction can be overcome, but we have to start by owning it. We have to start with the acceptance of where we are in our ecosystem and how we solve it. And I think the second thing is think like they do. If you're dealing with the engineering, think what engineering's fear is or needs are. Think what sales and account. So I thought that was very meaningful and a good and great examples. So leave us with something that you think is a takeaway you would have, and then we'll have an assignment for everybody to mimic you.
Yeah, I think if you want to summarize it into a single statement, I think it comes down to have a vision, of course, but recognize that you're all part of a team and that you're all performing a particular function. Professional services works across a lot of groups. And so allowing yourself the perspective of those teammates and leaders allows you to find unifiers between all those groups. And so investing in building those bridges will result in obviously better results for your customer, but also just a better working environment that allows you to adapt quicker for those customer needs. Because next time you come to them with something that's maybe disrupting their next sprint, they're going to be more apt to maybe listen to you and take that perspective because they know that you still have their agenda in mind and that you're understanding each other as part of a holistic ecosystem.
Yeah, that's very good. So I think a takeaway, and I'd be interested in your opinion, is, hey, everybody who's living in this, SaaS world or tech world, you can make these adjustments to make it a more integrated team, except that you're in the center point of the trauma or the tornado, and you can work them through. So I think that's great.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think identifying those points of friction and not retreating into defending your silo, but trying to embrace that as a problem that we own solving is important. I think the effective communication, which starts with understanding the other's perspective on what they're going to try, what their position on that particular topic is going to be, and how to communicate effectively with that. And then when all else fails, something else you were hitting on at the end is, if we take the client-centric approach to all of this, it solves a lot of our organizational challenges or where friction might lie. Because at the end of the day, that's what our function's here to serve. That's what we as an organization exist to do. And so I think that helps to overcome a lot of those challenges. So don't let that friction point stand in the way of doing what's right for the client.
Friction's an opportunity.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Hey, today we're going to talk about the things we've learned from Jason, and we're very excited. Jason shared a lot about creative friction and PS's situation in the organization, and we're hoping to share with you some thoughts how you might self-actualize it.
Yeah, I thought it was a great conversation. I think that topic is so all-encompassing that we could spend half an hour with Jason on the topic of creative friction in between certain functions. We could take creative friction that happens amongst and within the professional services team themselves, right, on projects or just overall strategy things. I'd love you to just take that term and try and think about how that applies to maybe some clients that you've worked with in the past and where you've seen that really play itself out.
First you got to understand that PS is so different than everything else they're used to, in product companies, software companies. They understand marketing. They understand going to a market. They understand how to pay sales reps. But PS is that, piece of the organization that they just hope it works and they kind of ignore it. But PS is right in front of the customer, right in front of the client, and usually wants to drive success. Usually has even if they're immature in their development curve, the individuals there, are staying in that group to drive success. And that causes lots of friction. And one thing I like about Jason is, instead of maybe the way that would affect me, which would be, this friction is just a pain and it irritates me. Jason takes the attitude that you can use that and you can explain it and you can get your organization to understand it. But one thing Jason's real big at, and I don't know if this came across enough in that, is that it takes a while to fix those things. And you've got to get management on that journey because it can affect some of your profitability in PS. It could affect some resources. He used development. And I think he was particularly talking, and I see this a lot, is, hey, what we're building is not solving the complete problem. Therefore, PS is going to have to do some stuff. And there may be some tools they need, some new things. I mean, we had a client we were just talking about that built a product that couldn't be implemented without more software and a lot of PS. And that caused that I need a lot of the development people. Well, that's counterproductive. So I think the way he would do that is go to management and explain what's going on, get a very detailed game plan, and then attack it. I don't think most people do that well.
No, that client in particular could have used Jason or somebody like Jason to really take on that particular problem. The way that one was operating was, right, there was the friction part of it, but that friction was not a healthy friction, and it didn't create any of the creativity or any of the positive outcomes that Jason
I would even say only negative outcomes.
It
breaks your heart.
Yeah,
it was only negative outcomes.
Because it was both the product team was required to do anything to help implement the product itself. PS could only take it so far. And then the product team was capacity constrained because they were working on other things. And so in some ways, from the PS team's perspective, they were handcuffing the product team was handcuffing the organization's ability to be successful. From the products team's perspective, PS should have been trained and enabled and able to execute on all of these things, but they just weren't running across enough deals at that stage to spend the time to stay fresh and current on how to operate it. And so because of that, it became this finger pointing game, and they weren't able to resolve that. But some of those tactics that Jason laid out, I think would have been very helpful from PS. Because one thing that Jason said that I think is really important is PS has to own this. They have to.
No one else will.
They have to accept it's their problem to solve, and they have to take the steps even if that means swallowing a little bit of your internal pride to make this work with the other functions. Because as soon as you start to do that and you give a little bit, you're going to get the reciprocation from those functions.
And make sure management knows the journey, because you're gonna be effective. Somebody's going to be affected negatively for a moment on their financials to fix that. We're all familiar with it. Happens with sales all the time, right? So sales is in a situation and they need content people to explain stuff, and they get PS. And if you're particularly good at that in PS, you get dependent on. And sometimes that, from the individual's point of view, that makes them feel great. But from managing the practice, if we're not working that and either picking up that money out of the deal later, which some firms do, or which might even not be good enough because that guy might be so important to delivery, right? But that's just another point of this, friction that we've got to strategically handle. And I just thought he was really good at making it, hey, you own it, and you can't do it if management doesn't know the impact of working on it.
Right.
So that was good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.